This is a build that's looking to both do critical strike damage as well as overpower damage. It needs a lot of maximum essence because Bone Spirit itself is going to gain a huge amount of damage from maximum resource. And then in addition to that, I am using minions as a utility piece. So there's a lot of moving parts here. But what you should try to hone in on what your build personally does is what stats are important to it, and amongst those stats, which ones can you get on your gear? Things like armor are fairly simple to understand, right? We need to be able to reach 9,230 armor across the board. It doesn't really matter how we get there. So if I can fix my armor through the gear that I have, I won't need to pick up armor in my Paragon board. For Bone Spirit in particular, and for the majority of builds at this point, your weapons, your gloves, your rings, and your amulet can all get you a huge amount of additive damage. When I say additive damage, I mean anything that says plain damage, critical strike damage, bone spirit damage, vulnerable damage, overpower damage. Any of these numbers, they all go into your additive damage bucket. I think I should link my damage explanation video up above if you've never seen it. But basically the takeaway that you need to understand is that on your gear, you get so much additive damage that prioritizing picking up more of it in your Paragon board is not necessarily a valuable use of your points. We want new multipliers. We don't want to keep saturating a single multiplier that already has a ton in the bucket. Other stats that you generally can't get in your Paragon board, you would find inside of your gear itself. So like critical strike chance is a really good example on the Necromancer, where there's only one option for this in the Paragon boards, and it's only for bone skills, and it's a single rare node, whereas you're not able to get it anywhere else. So prioritizing getting critical strike chance on your gear, and then finding the stats that you can't get on your gear in your Paragon board is going to be imperative to be able to make the most beneficial and synergistic options available for whatever you're trying to accomplish. So in the Paragon board for the Bone Spirit Necromancer, you're going to see that there were a lot of options fairly close to where I was pathing, where I could pick up damage. I could pick up more critical strike damage, which I said was valuable for my character. I could pick up more bone critical strike damage, which theoretically also would have been valuable for my character. I could be picking up more overpower damage. I could be picking up different instances of overpower damage or damage when I pick up blood orbs, anything like that. But what you'll notice is the vast majority of the time, unless it is just more efficient to path that way than not, I'm ignoring additive damage kind of across the board. Now, of course, there are going to be some circumstances like on the Barbarian that actually has multipliers that are based off of how much of an additive damage you have, most notably critical strike damage and vulnerable damage. So pathing through them on those classes might be valuable, but in the majority of cases, it's not. So we're going to be deprioritizing damage whenever we can to pick up multipliers, again, instead of saturating that additive bucket. Something that you might also notice is that even though I have a ton of maximum life on my character, like on my chest piece and on my pants and on my helmet, wherever I can basically fit it, you'll also notice I picked up every single maximum life node that I possibly could without sacrificing key points to be able to reach legendary nodes, or more importantly, activating glyphs. Now, why is that? The maximum life in all of these different circumstances act as multipliers of your total life. So by putting on an additional 4% maximum life here, that's gaining another 1.04 multiplier of all of the maximum life that I have. At this point, at least in Season 4, picking up as much maximum life in your particular Paragon board will tend to be a very valuable investment. So you'll see me going out of my way to actually path over to maximum life nodes when I'd be able to get a huge amount out of it. And the last overarching, just like generally good rule of one, understanding what stat you can and cannot get, and then maximizing the ones in the Paragon that are interesting or valuable. Two, making decisions to always path out to important stats, but trying to minimize pathing errors, is just the idea that you generally don't want to max out any of these glyphs. We'll use Amplify as a really basic example here. Amplify will not gain anything more by me putting additional points into intelligence. So if I were to increase how much intelligence I picked up, increasing it from the 40 required to activate the glyph all the way up to 50, this doesn't change how much my magic nodes are being increased by. It doesn't change the multiplier that I get from reaching the minimum requirements. For glyphs like this, obviously you don't want to be maxing them out. There's no benefit. But what about something like the Essence glyph? This is going to be a very large critical strike damage glyph. It's going to give me a crit damage multiplier once a target is no longer healthy. And on top of that, it gives me nearly 20 additive damage at rank 21 for every node of dexterity that I pick up. If you were to look around, there's actually a really decent amount of additional dexterity that I could be picking up on this particular glyph. I could have all the way up to 49, which would give me a whopping total of 194 critical strike damage. That's nearly 100 bonus crit damage that I'm just kind of leaving on the floor. This should give you some really good insight into just how valuable each individual Paragon point is. I would need 8 more points to be able to max this out. And 8 points, once you see my data table, is basically like half of a glyph. Any glyph that you want to activate is typically any glyph that you might want to activate, so this one giving me a 22% damage multiplier, is typically around 15 points to activate it. Now, there's some nuance to whether or not you're pathing out of a board, etc. But just to get it activated, 15 points. So the 8 points I spend right here would have to outperform half of a glyph. It would have to represent an 11% damage increase to match the bonus I would get from being able to put in a glyph like Essence. And again, just to give you an idea, this build that you're currently looking at is sitting on a little bit over 2,000 additive damage before I overpower, and after I overpower, somewhere around 5,000 total additive damage. So adding on another 100 damage into a 5,000 additive damage pool is nowhere near a 10% increase in my total damage. So those 8 points are just strictly better to put into a glyph, as opposed to trying to get a small amount of additional additive out of these same areas. Alrighty, so we have a basic understanding of the Paragon board. We're going to get some points. We want to path through it. We want to pick up valuable stats. We want to make sure to pick up legendary nodes that are useful to us, maybe some maximum life, maybe some damage reduction, maybe some really large pools of additive damage if it's relevant for whatever you're doing in particular. But Mac, you haven't really taught me the sauce yet. You haven't really showed me how you go about doing it. Well, that's where the basic rules that I kind of wrote down will help to start giving us some insight in how you go from just kind of putting points into making tactical decisions about where you're putting those points. And again, here's where we're going to start getting into like the nitty gritty. So like strap in, take down a pencil and a notepad. It's going to get pretty deep from here on out. First and foremost, you should only ever move 5 points before you get to the next important thing. What could I possibly mean by that? We're going to go ahead and use the cult leaderboard here that's using a Dead Razor glyph as an example. We need to be able to reach 40 intelligence in this board to activate this. And since I'm a minion build, I generally care about the damage reduction that we're going to get from it, but the damage is not necessarily super important to me. You're going to find quite often that you're picking up nodes that on the base level don't really do anything for you, but it's just because it's more efficient. Let's go ahead and start from the gate. Quite literally, I just put my point in. I just added this new board. God damn it. And then there are just two other things that are going to be really important for you to understand as a basis before we move on. First and foremost, your boards can spin. So in game, they don't necessarily do like a great job of immediately pointing this out, but just previewing another board being added on here, you'll notice that there's a rotate board button down here. The way that the boards are set up naturally are very typically not actually going to be very efficient ways of moving through them. You typically want to get to the glyph, you may want to get to a legendary node, but you don't want to waste time going through a bunch of rare and magic nodes that aren't valuable to you. Just go ahead and rotate that board. This is also, interestingly enough, one of like the most common questions that we get on Maxwell is, hey, my board doesn't look the same, what's going on? You just got to rotate it. And rotating it and how you rotate it and how you build through it is another one of those like little key mastery points that people will pick up on that will make or break just how efficient your boards are. Sorry. And then the second thing, which isn't immediately explained in game, is that how you put your, and the second thing that is not necessarily well explained in game is that the order of your boards does matter. If you look at any of the rare nodes, you'll notice that it says bonus. You'll gain an additional whatever if you meet the requirements. There's nothing you can do about the starter board, but you'll see that you need to reach 170 willpower to get 10 additional damage here, 160 dexterity to get an additional 100 armor here, and then additional resistance here for 170 dex, etc. Moving from your first board to your second board will increase the requirements by 60. So you'll see here that to activate a willpower node, I'm going to need 230 as opposed to the 170 here. Moving to your third board will increase it to 2. Moving to your third board will increase it by 60 again and again. So moving to our fourth board. So moving to our fourth board here, or perhaps moving to a fifth board. Where's my fifth board? Where did I put it? A fifth board, although I think this number is wrong. That's kind of interesting. Oh no, because I'm looking at different ones. Moving on to your third board increases it even further. Moving on to your fourth board, moving on to your fifth board, etc., etc. So to be able to reach these requirements, you may notice that cool. Thanks, game. Did I get the COVID? No, I didn't get the COVID. I have a tick where after I eat food, I feel like I have to clear my throat. Nothing speeds up tendrils, it just speeds up the animation of casting corpse tendrils. Moving on to your third board will increase it further, your fourth board, your fifth board, etc. Increasing the requirements means that you're going to have to get more of these stats, typically through the Paragon board, since all stats is a much more premium affix on gear nowadays. It's not available on a ton of things. Now, that being said, actually meeting the requirements for any of these, you're probably going to be able to do it unless you're something silly like me and running a 9-board setup on certain builds. And maxing out these bonuses is not always a huge, important thing for you to accomplish. Let's use this example. So Death Marked will give me 25 damage to injured enemies, which is not a particularly valuable stat because it's additive damage, which is already undervalued. That only works once they're below 35% of their maximum life. Now, if I do hit the requirements for the willpower here, I will only increase this bonus up to 50. So I'll gain 25 more additive damage. That's not going to make or break. That's not going to change really the outcome of my build. If I could hit it, sure, that's cool. It's a free bonus, but I wouldn't be worrying about it. The exact opposite should be said of a node like Tenacity on the Bonegraft board. This is going to give me 4% maximum life and then an additional 4% maximum life, so a total of 8% maximum life if I hit the willpower requirements. Because of that, I basically put Bonegraft as my second or third board on just about every single Necromancer build, since not only is this one node itself so valuable for your overall survivability, considering that that one node is basically like putting an entire Royal Ruby into a piece of gear. But then the value in the efficiency of the glyph socket on this board is hard to beat and is basically second to none when you're using it for something like Dexterity. Okay, and one last beginner tip, one last beginner thing that you should be aware of. The glyphs that you have and the stats that are available in your Paragon board are going to match the class that you're playing. Me being an intelligence main stat character, meaning that intelligence increases my primary skill damage and all of my effect damage, I'm going to find the majority of nodes in my Paragon board are going to be intelligence, followed by willpower and dexterity, and there's going to be a minimum amount of strength, since strength is not considered a priority stat for my class. Similar to that, the glyphs that I'm going to activate are only ever going to have intelligence requirements, dexterity requirements, or willpower requirements. If you were playing on the Barbarian, basically the exact opposite would be true. Strength would be your primary stat, the majority of your glyphs would be strength glyphs, followed by willpower and dexterity, and you would have a minimum of intelligence, and you wouldn't have any intelligence glyphs. So whenever we're building out our Paragon boards, we're basically asking the question, can I meet the minimum requirements of the glyph that I want to use in the board that I'm trying to put it in? And that's where the datasheet's going to come in handy. But right here is where we're going to start getting into the nitty gritty. We're done with the beginner course and we're moving on to the here's what you got to do if you want to do it yourself. So strap in, get a pen and pencil. You're going to want to take note of these things. First, hot tip, only ever spend 5 points moving somewhere. And if it takes more than that, it's inefficient. For this example, we're actually going to use one of the most efficient boards that the Necromancer has available to it, which is the Cult Leader board, which is a wild thing to say since the majority of people don't care about minions, and this thing kind of only cares about minions. But the stat arrangements around the glyph socket are so efficient that pathing in and out of this board is basically second to none. For this example, let's just go ahead and use an intelligence glyph to get an idea of what I mean by only spend 5 points getting somewhere. When we're looking to path through this board on our intelligence glyph, while actually hitting the requirements for it, we're obviously going to have to pick up intelligence as we go. Now, interestingly enough, both at the ends of the two areas from the entrance gate over to the exit gate, we actually have intelligence at that end. meaning that reaching that intelligence, which is our primary goal, can be done in 5 Paragon points. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Within 5 points, every point that I'm now spending will accomplish my goal. Whether that goal is activating your rare node by literally clicking on it, or meeting the requirements of a glyph. The points that I'm putting in now are getting me to activate the glyph. Now remember I said never move more than 5 points. Well, this isn't intelligence, but I need to get to the glyph socket. This only cost me 1 point to get to that end goal. As such, I have not spent more than 5 points. I'm being efficient. Now, obviously, there's going to be exceptions to this rule. Sometimes you just have to use 6 points. Sometimes by using 6 or 7 points, that then puts you within range of a rare node or a legendary node that you wouldn't be able to reach either way. When we're using the 5-point golden rule here, it's mostly for efficient pathing to and from glyphs to gates. So pathing through a board. Or understanding that when we're being inefficient, we'll have to make that efficiency up somewhere else. This 9-board setup that I used, which hits the minimum requirements to activate every single glyph in it, still has 35 points left over. And the way that I was able to accomplish that was by pathing through the most efficient boards and only ever hitting the 5-point magic rule every single choice that I did. So here, let's just go ahead and finish out the example. We need 25 more, so 5 more nodes worth of intelligence. Remember that you can also reach 10 intelligence whenever you pick up one of the rare nodes near a glyph. This will always be the main stat of your character. So the barbarian, this will be strength. The rogue, this will be dex. The druid, it'll be willpower. For me and the sorceress, it's going to be intelligence. So here, while putting a point in here gets me intelligence, putting a point in here doesn't. Right? Why would I want to do that when I have more intelligence available up here? Well, for this 1 point, in this second point, I got 10 intelligence, which is 5 per point. It's basically the exact same thing as putting in 2 points here. And as you can see, I've now reached this glyph. I have mastered it. I have reached the requirements for it. Sadly, though, I haven't necessarily been particularly efficient in the way that I went about it, right? Because to path out from here would take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 points. Also remember that you always have to put a point in to actually be able to attach another board. So that's technically an additional point, but it's a cost that you can't avoid. So we don't necessarily include that in the calculation to your detriment. But while putting the 2 points in here would get me the intelligence that I need, it's going to cost me an additional point than going up this way. So instead of building in this way, I could actually spend points here, which is only 5 intelligence for 3 points, but hear me out. Then I need to hit up 3 more, boop, boop, boop. Or just very simply doing this one again. And then I can path out 5 from here. What is going to be the most efficient for what you particularly need to accomplish is going to generally revolve around this 5-point rule of always try to be this efficient. The second rule here is going to be leave suboptimal boards as dead ends. Now, to determine whether or not your board is suboptimal, you're going to want to use this thing right here, which is all of the data, but I'm not going to force you to look at this data. I'm just going to have it available for anybody who wants to look at it so that they can use it as a tool later on. But let's go ahead and take a really good example here. We're going to use the Blood Begets Blood board. Blood Begets Blood would require you to spend 26 points to path to a dexterity glyph and then path back out of that board. Whereas if you just were hoping to activate a dexterity glyph, it would only take you 17 points. That would save you 9 Paragon points. That's more than halfway to another glyph. And when we say a dead end board, what exactly do we mean? Well, just like a street would be a dead end, meaning you're not going to leave out a different way, here Blood Begets Blood is acting as a willpower glyph dead end board. I'm not trying to path out of it, because as you can see, it would take me so many points to reach the next terminus. Whereas the Flesh Eater board, you can see that we're able to path through it very efficiently here. So in our case, Blood Begets Blood is a terrible board for this, and let's just go ahead and show it with that dexterity example. So as you can see here, there's not a ton of dexterity around the Blood Begets Blood glyph, but all of it is within a fairly concentrated cluster. So being able to reach out to these various points isn't going to be very hard for us. Now, we've already spent 23 points just getting to this board, so just keep that in mind. We're going to use that as a cool little example. But pathing up to the dexterity here, while not particularly efficient, doesn't have many requirements. At the end of this, we have not spent that many additional points to be able to hit the requirements for this glyph. So here, if I just knew I needed one more dexterity glyph, I wasn't going to have a full amount of points to be able to path through a board. Maybe I only have anywhere between 14 to 17 points left. You can still activate glyphs as opposed to what you would normally do, which is pathing through a board while activating that same glyph. There are going to be a lot of examples where using a board as 3 different exits, meaning coming in from one way and leaving out of 2 different sides, will allow you to continue pathing here, but allow you to add on a dead end board off to the end here. Typically, dead end boards will also be the last board that you put into your Paragon system. Because you don't need to path out of them, you can typically leave the ones that don't have particularly valuable rare nodes that you're not trying to hit the requirements for. Or heck, here, I'm not trying to hit either of the rare nodes even around the glyph socket itself. Maybe blood orb damage and healing from blood orbs isn't particularly valuable for me. That doesn't mean that the board isn't valuable for you, because the glyph doesn't care what board it gets put into, just as long as it gets activated. The next rule, and this is going to be something that is like significantly harder to initially grok, but is something that will basically impress your friends and make the difference between a board that does work and a board that doesn't work. But pathing through a board twice will often be more efficient than trying to cut through the middle. Is it possible to kill Diablo without doing Paragon levels? It is impossible to kill Diablo, actually. Here we're looking at an example of my Blight Necromancer. The Blight Necromancer, being a shadow damage over time build, really cares about the Wither board, because the Wither board is going to give us a huge multiplier of our damage over time. But what you'll notice is that I avoided cutting through the middle entirely. And why would I possibly want to do that? Well, interestingly enough, I'm actually using Wither both as a pathing board and a dead end board here. The first reason is because whatever glyph you're going to be putting into this particular board, just for this example, is going to be inefficient. It's not a particularly efficient board to actually path through, but we do want it in our setup in general. Second to that, the different rare nodes that are available throughout the board, at least throughout the middle of it, aren't particularly valuable. Here, I would be gaining additional damage to damage over time affected enemies, more damage to elites. I'd be just doing more shadow damage over time and just more generic shadow damage. But again, remember I said getting more additive damage here isn't going to be particularly good for my build. Like just this one weapon alone, due to the fact that generic damage actually double dips, is giving me a whopping total of 300, 400, 500, 600, nearly 700 additive damage just from my weapon. So oddly enough, this little 20 additive damage from this node is not particularly valuable. But what I do need to be able to activate is our legendary node. And on top of that, I do want to pick up this damage reduction, an incredibly valuable stat in this game, as well as more maximum life. The problem being, though, that pathing out from either one of these, if I wanted to pick up this in general, is not very efficient. You'll see I have to put in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So there, I'm breaking the rule of 5 points to ever leave a board, or to get to a new objective. But if we see how many points it took me to get to a valuable node, you'll see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then the next point I'm putting in is of high value to me. Similarly here, getting to the break and then picking up the legendary node is within the 5-point radius, since I need to get to this point. And then here, building down to this is also within the 5-node radius. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the next thing I'm picking up is valuable for me. So because of that, I'm going to path through this board twice, or even path through it once and then use it as a dead end as well. You'll see this on a lot of different setups where the legendary node is so far away from anything else that's valuable that pathing to it, while you could do it, is going to be very inefficient point-wise, and the things that you're picking up along the way are not going to positively impact the outcome of your build. Rule number 4 is always take maximum life. This is going to change a little bit based off the class that you're playing, but it's pretty self-explanatory. I always pick every single maximum life node that I possibly could, meaning that I'm basically losing out on one damage glyph, like the ability to build into one damage glyph, or one little pocket of additive damage, to instead increase my maximum life by a percentage. Maximum life is incredibly valuable at this point since they took away so many sources of damage reduction. The only way you can really increase your survivability is by increasing your maximum life. So anytime that you can pick it up, you should. If your class has damage reduction, like the Barbarian just has damage reduction against everything in its board, similar to the Sorceress, you might want to be prioritizing those nodes when you can as well. But I think that this is basically a rule you should always follow. If you can get maximum life, you should get maximum life. Rule number 5 is calculate, recalculate, and calculate again. What exactly do I mean by this? Well, it kind of touches on a few different things. Not only am I literally just saying determine whether or not that node is important for you, but also are you doing something as efficiently as you can? God damn it. I will remember one time to do this. One time. Hello, Matos. Welcome home. Yep. Thank you. The Witherboard, again, is going to work as a really good example here of when you should basically stop, look at what you're doing and go, did I make the right decision? The Abyssal Glyph is a really good example of something that kind of makes you ask the question. The Abyssal Glyph here is a dexterity requirement. I'm going to want to be able to path out of this board ultimately from a place where I'm going to get a lot of value out of it. I'm going to try to be as efficient as possible, and I need one more dexterity node to be able to accomplish this. Well, since I need to path out in the first place, I'm probably going to pick up this dexterity node right here. Now, here's where the rule of 5 gets a little bit tricky. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 would get me to right here, meaning that the next point that I put into it is going to be of value because it's required for the glyph. So I'm following the rule thus far. But all of the points leading over to here are not of value. They're not additional dexterity. But if I were to put in the points right here and then path up, I would be out of my board. I'd be able to go over to the next board, whatever I would want to put in. I have followed the rule of 5 each time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I've done that. Well, is this the most valuable thing I could have done with these points? Well, back when additive damage was more important, this would not necessarily be the right choice, because we have massive amounts of additional additive damage up here, as opposed to adding into our intelligence. Now, intelligence would continue to give me like additional damage to my core skill, but on this build, let's say right now I have like 2,300 intelligence. Is my intelligence going to give me the same benefit as this additive damage? Well, sadly, there's not one right answer here. For your build, if you don't have a lot of additive damage, the additional 8 that you would get from this might be very valuable to you. Whereas if you don't have as much intelligence, or if your additive damage bucket is already so saturated, maybe the intelligence, even if it's pretty small, would be better. An alternative way of pathing out of this that I could have done is gone like this, and picked up this node as well, which would no longer be as inefficient as if I had done this, right? So this would take me 2 points. So instead of basically these 2 points right here being spent to get up here, I could spend 1 point, making this effectively free for what my pathing required of me. And I still am technically meeting my rule of 5. I'm pathing out of my board in 5 points, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The dexterity node is something I would have to pick up regardless. So this is also within the rule of 5. And instead of a smaller amount of willpower, I gained more willpower. As opposed to some additional intelligence, I got a large amount of additive damage. And then because it would have cost me basically the same amount of pathing this way, sorry. And basically, since getting this node would either take me an additional point here or an additional point right here, I can basically regain some of this efficiency by going this way. In this way, you need to calculate. Have I put my points in the right way? Am I getting the most out of these points? Would it have been better for me to go out this way? Well, probably not, because pathing would take longer, but you don't know that answer until you ask that question. But similarly, is there a way to get more out of each point that I'm putting in here? Now, rule 6, we've already touched on it a lot, but basically additive damage is a trap unless it isn't. If you need additive damage to activate a multiplier, so again, if you have something that says the more additive crit damage you have, the larger of a multiplier you get, it's not a trap. If your build just says have additive damage at all and it doesn't really matter what kind it is a trap. Just remember that moving forward until something changes in the game. And while we kind of just touched on it right here, I have a different example to point this out, but basically it goes, if there's a better node for the same amount of points, take that node instead. Let's use the example. Ooh, actually, it's a really, really good example. The Bloodbath board for Overpower is a really good example of, are you using your points as smart as possible? So let's just go ahead and use the example. I want to make it all the way down to this legendary node, and I'm just going to go ahead and click this. All right, great. I've pathed all the way here. Now, did the auto-generate make the best decision with every single point that it could have? Let's put it to the test here. Now, for our build, We don't care about anything other than increasing our damage from the Paragon through multipliers. So we don't need more crit chance, which is something that Dexterity would afford us. We don't need more resource management or healing, which is something that Willpower would afford us. And we don't need any strength, because we're already at our armor cap. There's not going to be a lot of strength options on the board, but there are some of them. So because of this, we basically always want to be picking intelligence whenever we can, or the second best stat to increase our damage. For this example, since we're doing overpower damage, willpower is technically the second best damage stat we can pick up in our Paragon nodes while we are pathing around. So let's just look at a couple examples right here where we could have done a better job in the same amount of points. First and foremost, this node immediately. I picked up Dexterity, but I didn't need to. I could have picked up Intelligence. So for the exact same amount of points, I've just gained a little decent increase in damage there. For our next point, again, since we don't need armor at all, this strength is not giving us anything, but this willpower node would very slightly increase our overpower. Bada bing, bada boom, exact same number of points. It might not look as efficient to your brain because it's a little squiggly. Exact same amount of points, getting more damage out of it. Down into here, there's only really one opportunity to increase our damage. We have willpower, which will increase our damage, but intelligence is significantly stronger for accomplishing this. As such, I could put the point here as opposed to here, and I would have come to a better outcome. Now, similarly, the auto-pathing could have done something like this, where I picked up completely unnecessary strength, very, very low value willpower, and even lower value dexterity. I don't expect to be dodging at any point. Instead, by putting the points here, and again, making something that doesn't necessarily look as clean, we'll get a better outcome for the same number of points. In this regard, you should basically be asking this whenever you're pathing through a board. Is the point right next to me the best one? Or if I move 2 points over and then up, will it cost the same amount to get a better benefit out of it? And then let's go ahead and talk about this rule, which is a harder rule, and it's more so just a thing to kind of keep in your mind when you're thinking about the Paragon. And that is that some boards are good, even if, mathematically speaking, they're bad, because of other pathing requirements of the build. And Scent of Death becomes a really good example of this. Scent of Death is not the best board for pathing out of for any of the options available, not for intelligence, willpower, or dex. Scent of Death is one of the best dead-end boards for willpower. Funnily enough, though, you basically never want a dead end on Scent of Death because of how good it is for most builds. And then lastly, again, Scent of Death is your strongest willpower board, point for point, like the amount of points that you get in, the amount of benefit that you get out of a willpower glyph. But that's not necessarily important to us because we're not really maximizing glyphs at this point. We may in the future, which is why I included this data to future-proof it. But let's go ahead and look at this board. Scent of Death actually looks pretty similar to another board that we looked at, which was Blood Begets Blood. In fact, if you spend a little bit too much time looking at all these Paragon boards, you'll start to realize that a lot of them basically have a similar shape or will experience similar issues when trying to pad through them. And the distinct differences in quite literally just the shape of this little indent as opposed to this little outdent will drastically change the efficiency of moving through them. But if we're just talking about the glyph, Scent of Death does suffer from not being able to successfully meet the rule of 5. If I wanted to fill this out for a willpower board, I can follow the rule of 5 to get to a relevant node. By putting in this point after 5 points in pathing, I've been efficient. And then every other point that I put in is never more than 5 away. As such, I can get all the way out to here, activate my glyph, and now, how do I path out of this board? Well, pathing out of the beginning of it, this is, well, pathing out of the bottom of it here, we can follow the rule of 5. If only there was a way that we could have rule of 5'd our way to this node instead, meaning that maybe you're not looking to path out of one of the sides where 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7 points. 7 points is a lot to ask for pathing out of a board like this. But what if you were to just kind of flip it and reverse it? Because clearly this board is not good for entering into from this bottom gate. And I do mean quite literally flip it over. We can now start following the rule of 5 to get to those other priority nodes that I already touched on and things that you should generally follow as a good rule of thumb. First and foremost, I want maximum life. So by playing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, oof. 1 less efficient than what I would want, but I promise you we're going to make that point back. I'm now able to path over to a maximum life node. So I need to regain 1 point to regain that rule of 5, but I am able to find something of value in the board. Well, luckily, the legendary node is only 4 points away. So in following 2 rules of 5, I've spent 10 points to get to 2 points of interest. We're on the right track here. And then if I were to look at this same situation where I want to activate a willpower glyph, I can follow the rule of 5 again. 1, 2, 3, 4, and I can follow that same rule of 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, saving another point there, bada bing, bada boom. I'm in, following rule of 5's all the way in, and I've activated this glyph. Now, following that same rule of 5, I get to path out efficiently. So by spending 1 extra point to path out inefficiently, and in reality, that's only because resistances aren't valuable in the game at all, because you max out your resistances, at least on a Necromancer build. But technically speaking, even this would be within rule of 5 if this was an important node to pick up. But all of a sudden, we took a bad board, a board where I would have to spend 7 points pathing out to the closest gate, and instead was able to pick up multiple high priority, high value stats and legendary nodes, all within this same rule, and maintained efficiency throughout the board. Just because a board is bad on paper doesn't mean it's bad for what you need to accomplish with it. And it's by reorienting the boards and thinking of other things that you can accomplish inside of them that you can find efficiencies that otherwise would be lost if somebody is just blindly following hard set rules without using a little bit of imagination to get to these outcomes. Now, there could be a lot more rules that you follow, but where we're going to dip into now, that's what I basically have for like hard stuck rules that I generally try to remember every single time I'm looking at a board and trying to figuring out an efficiency at any point. I go, I'm not figuring it out. Have I abandoned any of my rules? Maybe I need to path through. Maybe I need to dead end. Maybe I need to look at this board in a different way. Am I following the rule of 5, etc. We're going to now dip into the Necromancer. These are insights very specifically for the Necromancer class and ultimately what the majority of people are watching me for, but I hope that you are able to find a lot of good information in this first part for whatever class you are playing. Now, the cool part about it, and maybe you've never really noticed this, is, do you remember this Scent of Death board? This is my willpower node with my legendary board right here with these like 2 little offsites here. Did you know that your class has this board too? Here we go. We're looking at the Scent of Death board on the Necromancer. Nope, gotcha. This is the Decimator board on the Barbarian. Yeah, it turns out that we actually literally have all the exact same boards. Now again, instead of intelligence, you get strength here. But here's your maximum life node, here's whatever your Decimator legendary node does. I don't know, I don't play the Barbarian. And here's me activating that same willpower glyph. Now, this one's Brawl as opposed to Dominate, which I was using. But all of these boards are extant on every other class. It's going to make it a little bit easier for me to be able to transcribe all of this data over to the other classes. I just got to figure out what their various stat orientations are so that I can make sure that I'm not just like copy and pasting and getting anything wrong. But again, I hope that the information I was able to share was valuable for you and your class. Sound off down below if you want me to do this level of analysis for your class. Again, depending on how many people are interested, I may or may not put the time and effort into doing it. So definitely sound off down below. You will basically choose whether or not I make this tool for you. But what I went and did was collected basically 5 different sets of data. And I'm going to explain the sets of data. And hopefully it's fairly self-evident based off of everything that you've already heard. But the first part is I went and looked at every single board that the Necromancer had available to it. And I asked the first question, what are the minimum number of points needed to leave the board? In this regard, we're talking about pathing. So again, getting to a glyph and then leaving the board through a different gate. This is pathing through the boards. And pathing through each one of the boards has some pretty interesting insights into how valuable those boards are. Not only that, I asked the question, how valuable is it if I want to activate an intelligence glyph for the bare minimum, activate a willpower glyph for the minimum, and activate the dexterity glyph for a minimum? And you'll see that I also went and color coded it for you. So just as a first example, Blood Begets Blood is the worst at kind of everything. It's basically only slightly better than Bone Graft if you want to path out of it with a willpower glyph, but it's bad at pathing. What does that mean about Blood Begets Blood? You generally shouldn't path through it unless you need to. There will be certain circumstances, especially on like a Bloodlance Necromancer that wants to pick up the Blood Orb legendary node and the Overpower and the maximum life, so you have to path through it. But for other classes, you probably don't want to use this board if the stats aren't relevant to you. And when we go and look at each one of the boards and kind of figure out what they're all the best at pathing through, that's actually how you get that 9 glyph board that I showed you. I asked the question, if I pick the most efficient path through every single board with their best glyph or their second best glyph, what does that look like? And that's how you get this, with, again, 35 points left over, 9 fully activated glyphs all throughout, because I pathed as efficiently as I possibly could. So here, Bloodbath is a 21 point investment to path through it and activate a dexterity glyph. On that Bloodbath board, I went and put in Essence glyph, which is dexterity, and I spent 21 points pathing from this point out to this gate. There's no way for me to have pathed more efficiently through this board by doing this. And what this first table will give you the tool for is determining when you should be using a particular board just for pathing if it's not relevant for you. So again, I may not particularly care about the Bloodbath legendary node, but my build might care about activating a dexterity glyph. So because of that, Bloodbath is going to be my best option. Similarly, both Bone Graft and Cult Leader can be pathed through for the same number of points. So if I don't care about the legendary nodes, if I don't care about the rare nodes at all, I just need to get the minimum amount of points to activate that glyph, I can use any 3 of these on the build that I need. To that exact same point, let's say we are using Blood Begets Blood as the example here. If I need to activate an additional dexterity glyph, and I've used up all the good ones for something else, maybe for intelligence nodes or willpower nodes, etc., and all I had left over were the other options here, I would never want to use Blood Begets Blood, because it's going to cost me the most amount of points possible to get the same benefit if I were to just pad through Flesh Eater, or heck, even pathing through Hulking Monstrosity, while still very expensive, would cost less than Blood Begets Blood. So green here will indicate when they are the best option for that glyph type, red will indicate when they're the worst option for that. And just keep in mind too, sometimes you can't always pick the best option. Maybe I need to use Cult Leader because my particular build is a minion build, so I need to pad through it and pick up additional things. I may not want to use it as an intelligence glyph here. I may want to use it as something different. You'll notice that like it's fairly good for willpower and it's fairly good for dexterity. So maybe I put an intelligence glyph that I don't really care about activating onto Hulking Monstrosity instead, and I use Cult Leader for something else. You're able to use this data point for determining basically where do the glyphs go. The second set of data that I picked up was how many minimum points are necessary just to activate the glyph after getting into the board. These are our dead end boards. It was the example of using Scent of Death as a dead end board for something, and you'll notice here that I label it as green because it is the best willpower dead end board. But because I don't personally want to dead end on this board quite often, because I want to pick up the legendary node, I want to pick up that maximum life node, I probably want to use one of the second best options. That would be Flesh Eater, Hulking Monstrosity, or Wither. Wither, I may not do a single lick of shadow damage, but it is the second most efficient willpower dead end board. So I can just toss this at the end of whatever build I'm using that needs to activate a willpower glyph, because I don't care about the other stats in it. Similarly, Wither is a terrible dead-end board for intelligence. So if I were to pad through for intelligence, that would cost me 25. It actually wouldn't even be good for that. Wither is a really, really bad board for the majority of our uses here. But I would definitely not want to use it for a dead-end board for intelligence. I would much rather use something like Hulking Monstrosity. I may not care about the Golem at all, which is what the Hulking Monstrosity Paragon board empowers. But what I do like is spending the minimum amount of points necessary for intelligence boards. And why is it so important to minimize intelligence cost? Let's just go ahead and look at those two glyphs real quick. People who understand this already will pick up on it, but it's something that I think is really important to touch on. To activate a dexterity or a willpower glyph only requires 25 points. If every single node only gives you 5, which for willpower and dexterity it does, that requires a minimum of 5 points, right? But obviously, getting to those 5 willpower points are going to be interspersed between other points too. Here, there's a bunch of different intelligence nodes, but I only need 5 of these willpower nodes. Now, the reason why it's so impressive some of the time that fully activating an intelligence glyph on Flesh Eater only costs 1 more point than fully activating a willpower node is the fact that an intelligence glyph actually requires 40 stats, or 8 nodes, or, 6 nodes in one. Activating an intelligence glyph requires 40 points. That is 8 intelligence nodes, or if you're using the rare nodes as well, one of these will count for 2. Very typically, you always have to put in a point to get there, so it's still 1 point per 5 intelligence. But the fact that you can fully activate a glyph that needs 3 more nodes to be able to do it in only a single additional node lets you know just how efficient these boards are for activating those glyphs, and how, even though these requirements can be higher, by intelligently using a dead end board as opposed to a pathing board, you can basically cheat out 2 to 3 additional free points just from being efficient. The second to last section here is what is the minimum point requirement building into a Paragon board and maxing out a glyph, getting the maximum total benefit of that glyph, as much of a stat as you possibly can. Here on our starter board, we're using Gravekeeper because it turns out that pathing through for a dexterity glyph on your starter board is 1 point more efficient than pathing through for an intelligence glyph on that exact same board. But being able to pick up the rest of the dexterity available to me on this current board would take 3 more points. That feeds into the relative efficiency coefficient of how good that board is at getting you stats per point. Now again, Gravekeeper here isn't necessarily a great example because it doesn't get us any additional benefits, but let's look at the Essence glyph. Without putting those additional points in, it would give me the minimum benefit for Essence. It would get me 114 additive damage. Putting in 3 more points will get me up to a whopping 154 additive damage. Now, if the glyph strength is changed in the expansion, or heck, even in Season 5, or if just the relative, like, availability of additive damage is changed in some way, maybe you care about maxing out these glyphs. In every circumstance, this isn't the most dexterity that I could have gotten. Over on the Bloodbath board, there are significantly more nodes that I could put points into to be able to push the benefits of this glyph even further. So how do these two boards stack up for their efficiency of how much bonus you get per how many Paragon points you need to spend? The starter board for Dexterity, very low coefficient here. You can use a total of 24 points to get 39 Dexterity. And since how much critical strike damage we get is based off of how much Dexterity we get, the efficiency here, like literally how many points per Paragon point, is 1.63. You get 1.63 Dex per Paragon point. Whereas on Bloodbath, you could spend 22 points, so 2 points less than it would cost on your starter board, and get 49 Dexterity. So you get 10 more Dexterity, which is basically like 40 more additive damage for 2 less points. The coefficient here per point is 2.23. Now the number isn't super important. I'm just using that as a way of measuring the efficiencies here. But interestingly enough, you'll see in this exact same datasheet that I have Cult Leader as the best board here. Now, why is that? For a mere 17 points, 17 Paragon points, you can get 39 Dexterity. So just remember, 1 Paragon point will get you 5 Dexterity, or 7 if it's available. Or 7 if it's available in one of the magic nodes, which it always will be on the Necromancer. So 5 more points over here should be equal to 25 more Dexterity, but it's actually only equal to 10 more Dexterity. So here the coefficient is better. I'm getting more Dexterity per point, meaning I'm getting more additive damage per point than the other option that I had available to me. But that doesn't mean that I always want to make this choice, because maybe I just want as much as possible. So I'm willing to eat those additional 5 Paragon points because it wouldn't get me more benefit somewhere else. That's never true currently, but that's why I have them differently labeled and why I thought it was good to call it out. So again, here, just for the people like want to maximize additive damage, this will be more relevant for you. I think that this may be more relevant in the future, but at least as it stands right now, it's there. You can look at it. You can kind of think about it. It's kind of interesting, but I would basically never recommend maxing out any of your glyphs because the additive damage bonus, again, is not worth the amount of points that you could get somewhere else. But there are circumstances where you're left over with 5, 6 Paragon points. You already have maximum res, you already have maximum armor, you're not going to reach a new rare node, and you just kind of got to ask the question, what is the most additive damage I could pick up? And then this part of the sheet becomes a bit more valuable to you. And then the last 2 pieces of data, and this one was just kind of like, I realized that I know this innately, but not everybody knows this innately because it's kind of slightly more difficult to conceptualize without looking at it, but we have rare glyph bonuses and magic glyph bonuses. Again, here for Gravekeeper, Gravekeeper is going to increase the bonus of your rare glyph. It's going to increase how much armor and how much intelligence this node gives me, and it's going to increase how much generic damage and how much intelligence this node gives me. In a lot of circumstances, using a rare glyph to increase these bonuses is just kind of like generally good. It's not super important, but it is generally good. Because the Flesh Eater board is typically very good for dexterity, all the dexterity that you need is lumped very easily and accessibly within this very small area. It leads down to the legendary node very easily, and then also pads out following the rule of 5. You'll typically see Flesh Eater used as a dexterity node. And because of that, you can put something like Gravekeeper, the dexterity empowering rare node boosting glyph, here. Now, why ever would you do that? Well, we're going to get maximum all resistance. Well, we're going to gain all resistance, and we're going to gain damage to elites. Damage to elites, one of the more valuable additive damages in the game, because really the only thing that you need to care about killing are bosses. Bosses are elites, as well as the elite monsters in something like the pit. So getting additional intelligence, getting additional high value additive damage, generally very good. And historically speaking, we kind of always did this by empowering these nodes right here. Nowadays, you don't really need the all res from this node to be able to reach cap because we have so much intelligence on our gear, and the additive damage again is just generally lower value. So you may see people not putting Gravekeeper here, but this is why you will often see it, because we want the benefit of Gravekeeper, which is a huge damage multiplier whenever we are near corpses at any given time. And then because it increases rare nodes, that's one of the best ones to put it in. Now, similarly, we have magic node boosting options here. And these ones are just significantly less important because the magic nodes that we have available to us will never give us intelligence. They'll typically give us some kind of generic additive damage, some additional willpower or dex, which used to be important for being able to meet the requirements for the rare nodes in your Paragon board, but that's so easy and trivialized at this point that's not very important. But there's one example where a magic node boosting glyph is really powerful, and it's on the worst board that the Necromancer has. Blood begets blood. I promise you, there was a use for this board in general, and it is very specifically in the case of an intelligence boosting, an intelligence requirement glyph, and the boost that it offers. We'll use Amplify, Sacrificial, sometimes Corporeal here. They're all glyphs that say give you a 10% damage multiplier just for activating it and increase magic nodes. Well, if we go look at the magic nodes around here, we'll see Willpower, not particularly valuable, but a little bit of additive damage there. We see Blood Orb healing. Now, back when we thought you would need a ton of Blood Orb healing to be able to reset Rathma's Vigor very quickly, this was kind of like super hyphy. Nowadays, we get so much maximum life that a single Blood Orb with no healing received will actually just trigger Rathma's Vigor for you. So like this whole part of the board is just completely rest in peace. But it is this rare node where it becomes relevant. But it's this rare node, Blood Empowered, where it becomes relevant. Just as you know, every single rare node will give you intelligence and then some type of bonus. Here, Blood Orb healing. That means that all of the magic nodes around it will also give you Blood Orb healing or the secondary stat around them. Similarly, Blood Empowered will give you damage after you pick up a Blood Orb and overpower damage. I don't get this one. I just really wanted to kind of halt the entire video to point this out. Why is this the only one that does this? Like over here, damage to elites, resistances, resistances. You got ultimate damage, you can get critical strike damage, or you can get ultimate damage. You got armor, you can get more armor. But no, very specifically on Blood Begets Blood, the rare node gives you damage after picking up a Blood Orb, and then the magic nodes give you overpower damage. It's hilarious. Now, the reason why these nodes are valuable for the build is that one, it's generally easy to path out to just the magic nodes that give you the damage. It's only 1 point inefficient because of this dexterity node. You generally pick up blood orbs on most blood builds anyways, or builds that are overpowering. And then the amount of bonus that you get here is actually very significant. The nodes themselves are a huge additive bonus because it's for overpower, which is very niche. And because of that, adding on a very large multiplier of the damage here means that each one of these nodes, each 1 point that you're clicking is 56 additive damage. Now again, on a typical overpower build, you're getting 3, 4, 5,000 additive damage, depending on how stacked your character is. So the 150 additive damage here is really just a drop in the bucket. But on much lower gear and on lower power scale, this amount of additive damage is actually fairly significant. So right here is kind of the only area where a magic damage increasing glyph is really prioritized. You'll see it used often in the starter board just because either increasing your armor early on is very nice to be able to do on these various armor glyphs here, on these various armor nodes here, or because it's only 1 point less efficient to do a dex versus an intelligence, it's very easy to reach the intelligence requirements here. Just being able to increase the generic damage means that you have 100% uptime of this generic damage increase. And it typically amounts to like, I don't know, like 100 armor or 15 additive damage. Not a ton, but definitely something. Okay, great. If you aren't somebody who wants to look at each individual, all right, great. If you're somebody who doesn't want to necessarily look at all of these tables and understand all of the data, I did make a notes section, and I also included notes for each board where I put the data individually just so you can kind of look at it. Maybe you're like, oh, what does Bloodbath offer me? You can go look at what Bloodbath offers you. But for the notes in general, intelligence in a pathing board is the least efficient option always, only because it takes more points to do it, typically, because it literally requires more intelligence to activate the glyph. Now, that being said, do not be led astray by the fact that pathing through intelligence here would take 1 more point than willpower, meaning I should never path with intelligence. Because again, we don't really care about willpower, the stat, or dexterity, the stat. But activating any glyph will get you 40 intelligence, which increases your base skill damage, also increases your resistances, so it's easier to max them out. So basically the note here is, while it is true that pathing with an intelligence glyph is less efficient than dexterity or willpower every single time, it is generally more valuable. So spending that 1 more Paragon point to do it in some circumstances is definitely worth the benefits that you get from the stats. The opposite end of this is that willpower and dexterity glyphs are the most efficient pathing board glyphs. So generally you would want to dead end with an intelligence glyph if you could in a perfect world, and you would always want to path through boards that you don't care about with dexterity or willpower glyphs. It's going to save you 1 Paragon point, but that can be the difference between activating a legendary node and not activating one. General Insight 3, Blood Begets Blood is just the worst pathing board. It's just so bad. It's the worst for intelligence, it's the worst for dex, it's the second worst for willpower. I already touched on this, but I needed to make a note out of it. The board just sucks. This is an insight that is like more particular to that idea of just when you're first getting into the Paragon board or just when you are starting off and your gear isn't great. Placing an intelligence glyph in your starter board allows you to choose between more maximum armor or just straight up damage. If you're on lower gear, you get to pad through the armor without being inefficient because it takes the same number of points to activate the glyph, etc. On the other end though, once you have enough armor to be able to reach cap, you want to swap over to that maximum damage because it's 1 point more efficient now that I think about it. But on top of that, you literally just gain more benefit out of it because getting more armor doesn't do anything, but getting more damage always will, even if it's a very small, insignificant amount. Another insight, just because I realized that this data might like lead people very slightly astray, you always have to path out of your starter board. So when we're talking about the minimum points needed to activate a glyph, that doesn't really apply to the starter board. Yes, you do get to learn the efficiency of like how many points it requires, because maybe you don't want to use that for activating an inefficient glyph as opposed to an efficient glyph, but you will always have to path out of the starter board. So you can never use this in your calculations for which boards are going to be dead end boards. You got to build out of it. They force you to. And I already touched on this, so I'm not going to beat it to death here. It was just the idea that Scent of Death is the best dead end board for willpower, but it's such a powerful board to actually path through that you wouldn't want to use it in that regard. As the Paragon boards change, this might be true for different boards depending on the new glyphs that we get, depending on whether or not they change any of the stats, depending on what new Paragon boards that we get. So just keep that in mind. Any one of these boards may change its identity between a good dead end board or a good pathing board, depending on what comes in the future. So this is just something to kind of future-proof it, and also just to remind people in case they skipped over that part where I actually explained this, it's here so that you can see it. Now, what are the insights to gain about the starter board? And I'm just going to go board by board and very quickly touch on them. One, it's not particularly valuable. Generally, Dex is more efficient than Intelligence, but Intelligence gets you more damage. And then on top of that, it is just kind of the worst board for maxing out glyphs. So if you are in the future looking to max out glyphs for like the most damage benefit, While it does have a ton of intelligence, right? It has 70 intelligence on the starter board. It takes 33 points to be able to reach that 70, which doesn't even come vaguely close to the most efficient option here. For 24 points on the Flesh Eater board, you would get 75 intelligence. So the starter board, the only real insight to share is that it is the worst for maxing out glyphs. Don't use it for that. For Blood Begets Blood, very specifically, it's one of the most valuable magic node enhancing options available to you, and it's fairly good for dead ending, but it is the worst pathing board, and it's also the worst dead end dexterity board. You don't want to use it for that. Bloodbath only has good things. It's tied for best pathing on dexterity. It's tied for best dead end intelligence board. It's tied for best dead end on dexterity board, and it has the most glyph maximum for dexterity. And while it's not the most efficient, because Cult Leader is technically more damage per point, it has more points to get, meaning a higher cap of total maximum damage. The Bone Graft board is tied for best pathing for dexterity. It's tied for best dead end board for dexterity as well. Sadly, it's the worst for willpower pathing, so just don't use it for that. And it's also the worst dead end willpower board. Most people are going to be using Bone Graft because it has tenacity, that maximum damage, because it has tenacity, that maximum life rare node. So a lot of people are going to be pathing through it regardless. So just make sure to not waste your time using it as a willpower pathing board. Cult Leader, basically the best board that we have, which is kind of funny since minions were so bad for so long, and the Cult Leader board was kind of like just shoved under the doorway because I never really looked at it. But as I came to appreciate it, a lot of things became very clear. One, tied for best pathing for intelligence boards. It's best for pathing through for willpower, tied for best for pathing through for dexterity, tied for best for dead end intelligence, tied for best for dead end dexterity, and it does have the best coefficient of efficiency for a dexterity glyph, and it has the best coefficient for dexterity point to damage from a dexterity glyph. Again, it doesn't have the maximum amount, but it has the most efficient. So if you only had 17 points to spend, it would get you the most bang for your buck if you didn't have 5 more to spend somewhere else. Flesh Eater board, pretty good board, all things said and told. Tied for best for dead end on intelligence, tied for second best on willpower. Remember again that technically speaking, Scent of Death is the best dead end board for willpower, but these are the second best for boards that you would actually want to dead end on. And it's also the best glyph for maximum intelligence to total bonus. Hulking Monstrosity, tied for best pathing for intelligence, tied for best dead end intelligence, and tied for second best dead end for willpower. I won't keep beating this horse. Scent of Death, best dead end for willpower, don't use it for that, and best glyph max for willpower as well, as just one of the best pathing willpower boards on top of that. And then lastly, Wither. Wither is tied for second best for dead ending on willpower, so you can use this, just kind of toss it at the end of your board for that. And it is the worst dead end for an intelligence board. And then just kind of on top of that, it's not really an insight because it's like not going to change how you go about doing it, but it's not the best pathing board for anything. And it is the worst intelligence for hitting the minimum, and is only second best at one other thing. The Wither board in general is just kind of bad for most things. You should only really use it for dead ending unless you very specifically need it for your build. What can you use for Shaco? Well, you don't actually even want to use Shaco on Wither right now. You want maximum intelligence, cooldown reduction, and maximum life or essence per second. You could put Void Pulls there. You could put like generic damage multipliers, like something like Exploiters. You could put up there. A lot of really good options, actually. And there you go. That is what I hope is a generically good for everybody to kind of look at Paragon board overview, as well as a hyper specific Necro board insight overview, and kind of like best practices, what you should look to avoid, how you should go about building through the Paragon board. And again, hopefully I've empowered you to be able to do this yourself. And while basically kind of trying to put myself out of a job, more so give you insight so that when you are looking at your favorite creator's board, or you're looking at a build guide site like Maxroll, that you understand why they're making those decisions and why they're important, or why you may need to make different decisions based on where you are with your gear, where your character progression is, etc. Now, there's a lot that goes into what's the best way to path through the Paragon board, very specifically while I'm leveling and while my glyphs are all level 1. That video would basically take 1,000 years for me to make, and I would not be able to do that for every class. And on top of that, we actually already include that type of information in our build guides and max roll. If you never looked at it, we do show you quite literally, like progression point by progression point, where to put your next board, where to put your glyphs, how to change it at the end, etc. So that takes me like hours and hours and hours per build, and just explaining every single nuance isn't necessarily an option I currently have available to me. On top of the fact, it's generally not that important, considering you basically hit level 100 in a day. So the times back when every single point would change whether or not you're able to do content at a slightly higher level are kind of gone. If it ever returns, maybe I'll consider making a tool like that, or making a resource like that. Let me know down in the comments if you think it's valuable. Maybe you can change my mind. But I hope that this helps you out. At the end of the day, I basically just want people to be able to make informed decisions. And this is something that I hadn't necessarily seen tackled at this level. And I'm hoping that I basically never have to do it ever again, because it took a lot of time. And my voice is completely hoarse trying to explain all of that. Let me know down in the comments what you think. I would deeply appreciate if you could subscribe to the channel if you're brand new here. If you haven't already, it would mean the world to me. And you don't want to be missing anything like this. If you appreciate it, toss a like onto the video as well. Helps me out a ton in the algorithm. But that's enough of me shilling. Thank you so much for watching this video. I truly, truly hope that it helps. And I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Doomer, thank you so much for the 1 year. I appreciate you. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Holy. Holy. Scrotums, Cocorico, John Bino, Ezagir, and Leo, thank you very much for the follows. Yeah, so I now can't talk. But if you had questions from when I was talking and I missed them, let me know. You got me for a little bit, but I gotta like take a nap, man. That was exhausting. Yeah, does anybody have any questions based off of what that fucking 2-hour-long video was? And god damn it, wish it wasn't 2 hours. And if not, that's fine. I want to go take a nap. Is it possible to kill Diablo without Paragon levels? It is impossible to kill Diablo at all, because Diablo is not in this game. But yeah, for Blight Necro, Shaco is not best in slot on Blight Necro in the end game. What the fuck? It's just very good, because obviously it's good, right? Like damage reduction. But you can use Shielding Storm there for more survivability. You can use Void if you want to. You can move Slaughter, or you can move Concussive Strikes up there as well. Concussive Strikes is probably the best one, now that I think about it. What is the highest Paragon level someone like me can reach? There aren't Paragon levels. There are only regular levels in this game. You get up to level 100, and you get a total of 225 points. Yeah, get in there, scrotums. Get in there. Get in there. And I'm tired. Love your videos. Thank you, man. Yo, what up, Chris? Now repeat rule 5. Rule 5 was calculate, recalculate, and calculate again. Basically, look at where you spent your points and look where else you could have spent your points to achieve the same effect and determine which of those points are better. Woody died in Last Epoch? Oof. Brad Newman, there aren't Paragon levels. You can only reach level 100 and get a total of 225 points. That's funny. This is like, this is the stupidest thing, right? Oh, man. You're from Diablo Immortal? Ah, welcome. I think at some point they'll redo the Paragon system with 48 skill points and class reworks coming. I've feeling at some point they'll rework Paragon. Do I think that they'll rework Paragon? Yeah, almost certainly. Would I recommend Sorceress to a friend? Yes and no. I think that Sorceress is very good. It can be very powerful. It can feel very good. It's one of the more confusing classes. And may not lead to the best first experience. If you follow a Maxwell guide, you should do pretty well. Say certainly again? Certainly. Does concussive strikes work with Bone Spirit Shattered Splinters? Does consecutive strikes? Can you help me to understand what consecutive strike means? I said with an accent? Certainly. Was it that? Yeah, they might mean a bunch of stuff, but once I've asked a question, I don't just begin explaining the thing, because there's no point in wasting breath until I know what the context of the question is, because it just leads to confusion. Oh, man. I'm tired. That took a lot out of me. How's the Paragon stuff coming along? We're done. Well, we're done with the Necromancer. There you go. This guide will not go on Max Roll, no. This will go on my YouTube channel. Chris, thank you very much for the follow. Are Uber bosses on rotation? Like, can I not do Lord Zir right now because his door won't open for me? Nope. That is not how that works. I don't know what would stop you from not being able to do Lord Zir, unless you like aren't on world tier 4 or yeah, no. Nothing should stop you from doing an Uber boss. Concussive strikes. Does it work with bone splinters? Yeah. I'm not sure what does it work with it means necessarily, only because what concussive strike says is you do more damage against targets who are dazed. It doesn't matter what thing is doing the damage. If the question is, do the bone splinters from Shattered Spirit have lucky hit chance? The answer is yes. Lord Zir isn't working. But how do I know if they're dazed? There's a dazed animation in the game. It's like popping gray bubbles above their head. Lord Zir. Where's Lord Zir? It's in the, what's it called? Where is it? There it is. I'm a big dog. I do big dog shit. And then if it's a boss monster, bosses are only dazed when they are staggered. You cannot crowd control. You cannot apply a crowd control directly to a boss. It applies as stagger. Yeah, no problem. All crowd controls in the game have some form of indicator when they're applied to a target. So a really good way to test this is to put on nothing but that thing and then hit people with it until you see something get applied to them. But do you play off stream just for fun? Just for fun? No, not at all. That's not a dumb question, though. I can't really like play this game for 8 hours and then go, okay, it's time to play this game some more. I have 3 to 4 jobs. So Lord Zir is working for me. I enjoy my time playing the game. But like, I wake up at 8 a.m., I do my day job, I come home, I eat some lunch, I get ready to stream, which means I need to like make a thumbnail and update a bunch of things. Answer all the questions that I get through DMs and answer like business emails. And then I start streaming, and then I stream for 8 hours. 7 to 8 hours typically. And then I eat dinner. You know, if it's a longer stream, like if it's at season start, it's a longer stream. And then I eat dinner. And then I like look at my girlfriend, and I haven't unwound yet, so I have to unwind. She goes to sleep. She has to wake up like a real adult, even earlier than me. And then it's like, if I have to make a video, I have to make the video. And now it's like 1 to 4 a.m. So there's not really like a played the game just for fun time for me. I have to enjoy playing the game while the stream's up. What? Sir. Oh, it's cuz that's his ramping attack. Forgot they have ramping attacks now. Still think it's a pretty cool job. Oh, it is a pretty cool job. That's why I do it. But it you know, I am not confused that what I get to do is play video games for a living. What you know, how do I describe this? You know, people love being firefighters. You know, when they go home, they probably don't want to continue reviewing like fire safety manuals and protocol documents and standards of practices, etc., etc., etc. You know, probably get tired of it too. You know, people love being programmers. They probably don't like to then go home and work on a different programming. Well, programmers are sick in the head, so they actually probably do a bunch of insane stuff you wouldn't think about. But you know what I mean. You get the point. I don't need to belabor it. Sandy, thank you for redeeming the darkness. The darkness has been redeemed. Hopefully, the darkness will stay redeemed. You've delineated. It's not what I thought the word delineate means, so I'm gonna have to Google what delineate means. Describe something precisely. That's what delineate means? Indicate the exact position of. Describe something precisely. To delineate. Okay. I'm gonna go past it. An efficient path. I've explained that an efficient path may be preferable. I explained that an efficient path is the most important, but can be broken sometimes. How do I feel about the perception that any other node choice deviating from the best path is likely limited and or inconsequential? How do I feel about the perception? So the perception here is speaking to a thing that I can't necessarily point to because I don't know who is having this perception or what group of people we're attributing to this perception. That any other node choice deviating from the best path is likely limited and or inconsequential. You have the perception that deviating from the best path is likely limited. It's not limited. I don't know what limited means in that context. And or inconsequential. Well, it's not inconsequential and it's not limited. There are a ton of pathing options where there is a best and a worst. And the difference between those two things, like per path, you can basically do it like 3 times per path. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, around 15 paths per Paragon board. So it's the difference of picking up 45 intelligence and not picking up 45 intelligence. And the difference of 45 intelligence at 1,000 is the difference between a 2x multi and a 2.45 multi. And that's not inconsequential. So even at 2,000, it's a 20%. Sorry, it's a 4%, not 40%. So it's a 2 times multi or a 2.0 or a 2.04, which is representative of 1/50th increase in damage overall over 2,000. So like 2 to 3% increase in damage. Is a 2 to 3% increase in damage inconsequential? Well, considering a 2 to 3% increase in damage is like sometimes the difference of a single skill rank or a third of a glyph. Do we consider a third of a glyph inconsequential? Probably not. So how do I feel about that perception? That perception is not rooted in facts and is wrong. I don't feel anything about it. It is incorrect. Or it's not accurately perceiving the universe that is described by the action taken. I guess is how I feel about it is how do I feel about it? I find it weird that someone would choose to have a misrepresented outlook on math. As a programmer, probably sick in the head. Look, to be a programmer, you gotta do some stuff. That's all I'm saying. I didn't get an Uber unique. What the fudge? Oh, it's so weird to have my old gear back. No streams next week. So next week, because I'm going away on the 16th, I will have a stream on Monday, and then there will be a pretty big stream on the 18th, I will say. Excuse me, fairly big stream there. And then no streams again until the next Monday. Big exciting times. I get to go to Seattle. I've never been to Seattle. I get to do the live premiere of the new content and new class for the expansion of Diablo 4, a video game I play. Any idea on the times? We don't have the time for the campfire chat yet, but my stream will immediately follow the campfire chat. And I think I'll only be able to stream for a couple hours. But it'll be immediately following the campfire chat on the 18th. Like, they're gonna end it and toss it over to us. Used to live in Seattle. What should I know about Seattle before I go there? You fly into Seattle on the 18th. Ooh. Please don't walk around at night. I have no intention of going anywhere. Seattle freeze. The Seattle freeze is according to a widely held belief. Difficulty with making new friends in Seattle, Washington, particularly for transplants from other areas. An article written by Dan Mapes appears to be the first known use of the term, although the phenomenon is well documented. Newcomers to the area have described Seattleites, which is the worst name, as socio-culturally apathetic, standoffish, cold, distant, and distrustful. People from Seattle tend to mainly interact with their particular clique in social settings such as bars and parties. One author described the aversion to strangers as people who are very polite but not particularly friendly, while some residents dispute any existence of the Seattle freeze altogether. Wait, they're extroverts? It's not extrovert? Huh. I mean, all right, yeah. Just be careful. Yeah, I've no intention of going out at night. I mean, we're gonna like, yeah, I can't talk about the details yet, but I think I'm going to be very busy and mostly just in a hotel or in the studio. I don't intend in going out and seeing Seattle. Once you see one city, you've seen every city. They're all mostly the same. They just kind of have different shapes and different accents. Try coffee? I don't drink coffee. I'll try it, but I don't like Starbucks and I don't drink coffee. So I'm going to mostly do nothing. I'm going to mostly sit in my hotel room and hang out with Rax and Woody and Fame. I just can't drink coffee. It messes with my stomach. Oh, thank you very much, though, so I appreciate that. Wizards of the Coast is in Seattle. I do care about Magic. I don't think enough to like go to WotC. I also I quite literally do not believe that I will have time. Like I'm flying in, I gotta do stuff, I'm streaming, I'm leaving that night. As a partner, Blizzard really needs to hook you up with some more stash tabs. Stash is looking tapped out from all the testing gear. Yeah, I mean, you're not wrong. Like, come on, man. Give me that streamer privilege. Yeah, it's rough. Pike Place Market is definitely cool to see. I believe that. But I don't really have like time. I'm leaving a dinner with Blizzard to get onto my flight. Because I'm flying back home. It's a 6-hour flight. I'm flying against the sun. I'm getting back home at like 9 a.m. I'm leaving at like midnight or 11 or something like that. Which means I have to get there like an hour and a half early. So I'm gonna get to the airport at like 10:30 at night, get on a flight, hopefully go to sleep. I can't really sleep on planes. I flew to and from Thailand, 16-hour flight from Dubai to America. Did not sleep on either flight, was the worst. Just because like the total flight is something like 22 or 24 hours. Just stayed awake. Bad. Might cross paths? Well, you'll know who I am. You'll see me. I'll be the me-shaped one. Please don't steal me. I have shit to do. I'm now like pre-tired about the concept. I'm pre-tired. Also, look at this amulet. Look at how good this amulet is and how bad it is because Infinimus sucks. Look at how good of an amulet this is for Infinimus. How bad it is. I made this with my own hands. Think of how insane of an amulet this is. With my own 4 clicks. I had to click this a lot more than 4 times, but yeah. Oh, did they fix it's actually C. Did they make good on their promise? Hello? Okay. Okay. What can they do to make Druid and Sork better? Both those classes feel so meh compared to the other three at the moment. What can they do? I don't know, man. I don't play them classes. I'm sorry. I appreciate the follow. They could streamline some of the effects. They can make the Sorceress less reliant on so many like additional systems. But yeah. Last Diablo 4 streamer standing, appreciate that. Thanks. It's mostly like I like Last Epoch. I wasn't really gonna have time to jump into it, like really. Kind of missed like the opening weekend, so it's like, can you not promise us that you will try to talk them into making a Darkness Key passive? Can I not promise you? I can't promise you that I will have the opportunity to talk to... Like, I don't even know who's gonna be there. To Rax's credit, I do think that the Druid taking that long to unlock its ability sucks the moon out of the sky. Like, I go kill a pack of monsters and I walk down the road and I kill a pack of monsters and that's it. And I love Woody, but I love Woody. But what I liked about Woody's response was basically like, you shouldn't care about it this much, which is like just kind of a weird response to it. It's like, do I think this is the highest priority? No. Do I think it's weird? Yes. Is that worth looking into, considering they, like, people complained that you even had to do side quests at all, and they made it so that you never have to do another side quest ever again in your life? Like, it's all part of the exact same experience as far as I'm concerned. So like, yeah, I think it's worthwhile, like, bringing it up. Woody's like, it's not a problem. I'm like, it is a weird point of additional frustration for people, especially new players to the game. So like, yeah. Hear me out. Instead of change the druid class quest, buff barbarian. Give barbarian another weapon. Man, hey. Because now that like I'm like really aware of the fact that people who watch my content also now see my live streams on YouTube. People really don't like it that I complain about the barbarian, and I want you to know, if you're watching this, get bent. It's bullshit that they're so strong. Like, I'll be getting like comments about the barbarian on videos that have nothing to do with it, and I'm like, I'm sorry, it's your favorite class. Get bent. All right, I think I'm gonna call it here. I did start stream a little bit late today, and my voice is now completely torn asunder. Let's go raid somebody. Let's bring the 10 people watching me over to somebody else. Yo, Makuna's playing Elden Ring. Let's go. Holy, 80 people here. How many people on YouTube? Bro, 30 people are on YouTube. I appreciate y'all. All right, let's go raid somebody. I didn't even look to see who's streaming. Who's streaming? Well, Blood Farts is streaming. It's powerful. Beast. Fucking nobody streaming. Hold on. Who's streaming? Nobody. Nobody? Alrighty. Then we go with my buddy. Let's go. Let's go. Alright, y'all. As always, auf Wiedersehen, au revoir, arrivederci, sayonara, so long, ciao, kapkum krab, sawadee, guten Abend, guten Nacht, hasta mañana. See you all again. Cheers. Bye-bye.